The Yugioh North American World Championship qualifier is happening in less than a month's time. This is one of the most prestigious tournaments of the year, taking the top 6 strongest duelists from the North American region and sending them to the World Championship in Paris, France. 2 of these slots will be given to the finalists of the World Championship Points Playoff Tournament, which comprises of 16 duelists with the best finishes across regionals and YCSs during the regular season. But of course, me being located in Western Canada, where Yu-Gi-Oh is not exactly the most competitive, in order to receive an invite to the World Championship, I have to place in the top 4 of the actual WCQ tournament. The only issue is I haven't really been playing competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! And with only a couple of weeks time left, I really have to play some catch up. So I took it upon myself to study the current metagame, of which there are a couple of very strong decks / engines. It seems like the best decks right now are a mixture of either Ryzeal, Mitsurugi, or Malice decks. 3 of which I'm really only familiar with, one being Ryzeal, having played pure Ryzeal at the last YCS Vegas. After a couple of days of diving in and studying the metagame, there was something extremely critical that I noticed. Like most Yu-Gi-Oh formats, all of the current decks that can go first can put up a basically unbreakable board when unimpeded. Whether that's putting up a bunch of disruptions, hand looping your opponent, or locking them out with something like Arch Nemesis Protos, if hand traps didn't exist in Yu-Gi-Oh, whoever wins the die roll just wins the game. But thankfully, there are hand traps, 9 of which seem to be included in every single main deck. Droll Knockbird is extremely important to counter the Mitsurugi strategy, preventing them from adding and special summoning back the ritual monsters from the graveyard. Although it's not very good against Malice, Mitsurugi variants are so prevalent that you have to main deck Droll Knockbird to have a chance going second. Next are the 2 Charmy cards. Mall Charmy Perulia allows you to draw a card every time your opponent summons a monster from the hand, and Mall Charmy Furulos does the same except from the extra deck or the main deck. In order to win in this format, you literally have to find a way to beat 9 of these cards. Your deck has to be able to play through Droll, Furulos, and Perulia, giving your opponent the minimal number of draws and still setting up an end board. The next thing I noticed is that your deck has to be able to go second. Yes, all of the decks can do crazy things in Yu-Gi-Oh when going first, but how many decks can actually beat those crazy things when going second? With this in mind, the first deck I jumped to was pure Ryzeal. I know it sounds a little bit crazy I would try and play a deck that's been severely hampered by the ban list, but honestly the Ryzeal engine gives you a lot of flexibility playing into the popular hand traps. Against Droll, you can lead with Ice and still make a detonator while your opponent goes neg 1. Against Fulos, if you start X Ryzeal, you can still make a detonator and only give them 1 draw, which guarantees you have up to 3 pops with detonator backed by any non-engine that you have in your hand. With Perulia, you can lead with Ice Ryzeal, giving them 1 draw and still ending on the same detonator. And I was also a little bit enticed by the fact that we're getting some new support for rank 4 monsters in Duelist Advance. And yeah, I'm gonna have a field day trying to pronounce these names. But the one that caught my attention the most is Dododo Warrior, who's a retrain of the original Dododo Warrior. By sending another Dododo monster as a cost from your deck to the graveyard, you can special summon this card from your hand. And there just happens to be an existing monster called Dododo Dwarf Gogogo Glove, who allows you to bring himself back while you control a Dododo monster on your side of the field. So Warrior in your hand becomes a starter or an extender, being able to make any single rank 4. In the case of not opening any Ryzeal names, I can go ahead and make Dual Drive and search for my names, or Inferno Flame Banshee to search for Ice or X, but I can also use it as an extender to clear the pathway for my Ryzeal names, making things like Tornado Dragon or Excite-On Knight, all without using the normal summon. But the only drawback is you do have to play the gloves, which is a horrendous draw. This card basically does nothing on its own, and it's just a level 4 body. We also got a retrain of Goblinberg. Yes, the original Goblinberg was not very good, but Gogogo Goblinberg is a lot better because now you can summon another monster directly from your hand, deck, or graveyard. But it specifically has to be a non-warrior Gogogo monster, so you can't summon Dododo Warrior, but you can still summon out the gloves. He also has an extremely powerful effect where if you detach him as a cost for an Xyz monster's effect, you get to search for a Dododo Warrior directly from your deck to your hand, which is just insane value for a single normal summon. But there was one glaring issue with this card that I noticed instantly after playing just a couple of games. Gogogo Goblinberg plays into every single hand trap known to man. Not only will cards like Valor and Impermanence stop him, but you also fall victim to Dominus Impulse, Ghost Bell because he can special summon from the graveyard as well, Ash Blossom, and even Drone Lockbird. Because Gogogo Goblinberg has the effect to search for a Dododo Warrior upon detaching, it makes you want to go into the Infernal Flame Banshee line, but if you use Flame Banshee to detach him and add a copy of X and your opponent drolls you, not only are you under droll, but since we already used the normal summon, we can't even search for Ice, meaning we're not going to be able to stick a detonator on board unless we hard open another Ryzeal name. This card also falls falls victim to Fuwalos extremely hard. Previously, Fuwalos in response to an Ice Ryzeal's effect was really backbreaking and meant that you lost the game if you didn't have Nash Blossom or a Called by the Grave to counter the Fuwalos. But by playing Goblinberg, it just makes you more susceptible than ever to Fuwalos. So I opted not to play this card and decided instead to focus on the Ryzeal names, with X Ryzeal being one of the best cards in the game to open with right now. Not only does he get you free value, but you also get to send an Xyz monster from your extra deck to the graveyard. And going second, he's extremely powerful into boards, guaranteeing at least a 2-for-1 trade because they have to deal with the X, but also a card like Meteorologic Aggregator who can negate any face-up card on the field. Eclipse Twins gives you insane follow-up in the grind game, and we're actually getting another card that X can send. Valon the Psychic Skyblaster allows you to destroy any face-down card when he's sent to the graveyard, which makes X become an MST. If you couldn't get any crazier, well, apparently they made him even stronger. So I decided to try a pure Ryzeal deck heavily focused on playing as much non-engine as possible, bumping it to as high as 23 non-engine / hand traps. With X being one of the strongest cards right now, I decided to play 7th Tachyon and max out just to deal with the consistency issues that the deck struggles with. And of course, being limited to one bonfire, I feel like always having X is really important to play into cards like Fuwalos, but also to break boards going second. And Dueling Book Unrated is one of the best ways to test out new cards before they're released. But a couple of games in, I realized that their deck still bricks a lot, and we're probably gonna have to pad for some more consistency, so I took a page out of the OCG book and decided to max out on 7th Ascension, which obviously is a lot worse because you do play heavily into Droll and Lockbird, but the theory behind playing into Droll is that we're gonna have our own hand traps in our hand, ideally a Charmy or two, so if we do get Drolled on the first action search, we can pass turn and then use our Charmies as if we went second. And after playing a couple of more games, I realized that the deck was a little bit too fair. Unfortunately, the Ryzeal cards just don't have a high enough ceiling to deal with a lot of the other decks out there like Mitsurugi Ryzeal. Especially because we're playing Effect Failure, Impotent Impermanence, and Nibiru the Primal Being, which are very good against Malice, but pretty bad against Mitsurugi, which is why a lot of players ended up dropping them. And that's when I noticed another core problem with pure Ryzeal. Even though we have an extremely high possibility of opening 2 or more hand traps, we ran into the problem where Mitsurugi can basically still put up a mini board throughout multiple hand traps, especially against the ones that aren't named Droll and Lockbird. So they were always guaranteed to set up at least a Murakumo plus a Prayers set or the Trap on top of any non-engine that they have in their hand. And on our turn, we were down to 2 or 3 cards after having hand trapped them multiple times, especially knowing that pure Ryzeal is not going to OTK or win on that turn, so giving them another turn when they have infinite cards in hand just meant they were going to break any semblance of a board we were able to put up going second. But besides the issue with consistency, there were a couple other problems that I noticed with the deck. For starters, it was difficult to side deck certain cards, for example Phantasme or the Bestials, which put a non-level 4 body onto the board, which means that X Ryzeal can't trigger to search, but because the extra deck's so tight and strictly plays Xyz and no link monsters, it means you're not able to easily clear a body off of the board. We already have that issue with Nibiru, but at least you can summon the giant token in attack mode and crash the Nib. I also felt like the Dodododo Warrior engine is actually really powerful and can probably be splashed in some other decks. Even though he locks you in Xyz summoning for the rest of the turn, in a Mitsurugi variant, it's also a starter because you can go to the King of the Pharaoh Imps and search for Habakiri. I also discovered there's a potential way to beat Droll and Lockbird or other hand traps by going off into Traptrix or Rafflesia before you start your combo. And upon the resolution of a search, if they change Droll and Lockbird, you can use Rafflesia's effect to send a copy of Gravedigger's Trap Hole to the graveyard to negate that Droll and Lockbird. You can also make Baguska if you're under any of the Charmies or Droll and Lockbird, but I think the one thing that made me apprehensive about playing this card was the fact that you did have to play 1 brick, and in the average 40 card deck, if you have 1 lone copy of a card, you actually have a 10% chance of seeing that 1 copy in your opening hand, which is actually pretty sizable. And in a tournament of thousands of players where you're battling off against the strongest of the strongest in your continent, playing Yu-Gi-Oh with a 4-card hand pretty much just means you lose. But I still think the engine is really powerful, and a lot of players will probably be experimenting with it in time for the WCQ. But before I discarded the idea of pure Ryzeal, I discovered that there were other Onomatopia cards that are being released in this set, all of which contribute to extremely toxic hand loops using Evil Swarm Ouroboros. Onomatopera can also search for both Dodododo Warrior and Gogogo Goblinberg by discarding another card. And in theory, this card's a lot better than 7th Tachyon because you're guaranteed to search for the Warrior, and you can turtle up with Baguska and pass your turn if they hit you with a Droll and Lockbird. But obviously this card is a lot worse against Ash Blossom because they're guaranteed a 2-for-1 trade. And mathematically speaking, you're not going -1. It also allows you to take advantage of Dodododo Warrior's secondary ability that can search for a Zubaba monster when he's detached as a cost. And there's a card called Zubaba Bancho Gagaga Coat, who is another extender. Onomatopera can also be searched off of Gagaga Girl, a semi-generic rank 4 that can be made using any of the other names. Now this deck seemed a little bit more appealing in terms of power and consistency, efficiency, but it forces you to play a bunch of sub-bricks. Zubaba Bancho can't be special summoned unless you control a Gagaga monster, meaning you have to be already playing in order to take advantage of him, and even cards like Gagaga Gambara Knight just aren't very good because it's just a generic level 4 extender, and nowadays that just doesn't cut it. What's the point of playing a Ryzeal monster if it can't search another Ryzeal name? These cards are still technically playable even if you see them going first, but going second, they just don't do anything. And although I think the deck is definitely good enough to top 64 the event, I just don't think it can get any deeper than that, because the minute you face some strong players and you lose a die roll, you're going to be in a lot of trouble drawing these cards that are useless. So for that reason, I shelved both the pure and the onomatopic Ryzeal variants. But there were some other new decks on the radar. Vanquish Soul is currently the closest thing to tier 0 in the OCG, because they have the K9 engine, a series of level 5 hand traps that work really well with Holy Sue. Unfortunately, these cards come out in the Justice Hunters booster pack, and that's not going to be legal for our WCQ. But we're still getting Vanquish Soul Holy Sue, as well as Vanquish Soul Rocks, and Vanquish Soul Start, a field spell that lets you add another Vanquish Soul monster from your deck to your hand with a different attribute than one you control. Previously, Vanquish Soul Dr. Madlove didn't really do much, but now it's a full combo on its own because you can search for the field spell and then add a copy of Ryzeal. And in testing, I had already encountered this deck, and it definitely gave me a lot of trouble. With the usage of Vanquish Soul Start and Vanquish Soul Snow Devil, you could actually protect your monsters from being destroyed by card effects, giving you protection against Mirakumo board wipe as well as Exciton Knight. The deck also seemed relatively consistent, and you could play a lot of non-engine. But I'm not sure if the deck has the ceiling to actually go as far, because going second is no different than a Ryzeal variant where you still have to use your monsters to break a board. The other issue is the fact that you have to play certain attribute non-engine cards like DD Crow, Ghost Spell, or Rescue Ace Impulse in order to have the right fire and dark attributes for the effects of Ryzeal and Holy Sue. This means that you're technically playing a weaker deck in terms of non-engine, which doesn't really appeal to me. But that being said, I wouldn't be surprised if the deck made it deeper into Top Cut because it checks off all the boxes of a top tier control deck. Gem Knight's also got a lot of new support, and apparently there's a blind second Gem Knight deck that's actually really scary. The only issue with this is that it does play board breakers, and I don't think I have enough time to test a combo heavy deck like this and actually learn it well enough to win the event. In fact, honestly, I don't even know what a lot of the new cards do, and I'm just hoping that this is more of a glass cannon and it's not something I encounter. Lunalights were also quite competitive a couple of years ago, but the new support pushes them over the edge. We're getting a masterpiece fusion in the form of Lunalight Liger Dancer, and he's unaffected by any card effects except for Lunalights. And it's actually really easy to make this card or multiple copies thanks to the effect of Lunalight Kaleido Chick. I've even seen endboards where they have double Liger Dancer plus a Baguska, and Liger Dancer lets you Raigeki your opponent's entire board as a quick effect. But with this being on the horizon, I figured players might actually pivot their deck building to counter this. Mitsurugi players could easily side and search Wosu, which allows you to tribute over the Liger Dancer, and players might even use Underworld Goddess, which is another answer. The other issue I discovered was that the deck does have some consistency flaws and gets caught in the hand trap crossfire. It's definitely quite vulnerable to Drone Lockbird because it searches a lot, and even Fuwalos might allow the opponent to draw enough cards that they see an answer or a way to stop you from summoning out the Liger Dancers. And personally, the card quality just isn't all there when you go second. I mean, imagine going second and seeing cards like Godleo or Kaleido Chick in your hand and not having Advocate non-engine to stop your opponent's midboard. I just feel like it doesn't satisfy the requirement of being able to go second in this format, so I don't want to take the risk. I will say that this deck can, however, play Dominus Impulse, which is arguably the best card in the format right now because it deals with cards like Mitsurugi Ritual. You can also play a card that a lot of people don't know about called Heavy Polymerization, which allows you to utilize monsters in your extra deck as fusion material up to the number of monsters your opponent controls. So going second, they can set up a Liger Dancer with just 1 or 2 cards. Lunalight Silverhound is also really powerful because it can negate the activation of spell and trap cards while it's in the graveyard. And while I think this deck is potentially strong enough to make it to Worlds, you do have to get a little bit lucky. But with Ryzeal and Malice, there are actually answers to Liger Dancer. Malice can set up a Cyber's Wicked and protect their monsters from destruction, and then link climb up to an Axis Code or a Heart Scriptor and swing over the Liger Dancer by battle. Ryzeal can also make a Daguerreus that can be protected by a Detonator and then double the attack of Detonator to swing over. I do have the option of potentially trying Memento, but again, it's a heavy combo deck that requires a lot of pre-planning in advance, and I just don't think I can learn it. Blue Eyes White Dragon is another really strong deck, having won the German National Championship with over 2,000 players, but it does have a lot of bricks. I do know that we received Orcus support, and this can actually be splashed in with the Mitsurugi pretty well because they're all dark monsters, which allows you to play Dominus Impulse. On top of that, with one single Harp Horror or Gursu, you can actually end off with 2 level 4 bodies on the board, go off into King of the Pharaoh Imps, and search for your Mitsurugi engine, so it does bridge into each other. But with that in mind, there's really only 2 engines that are playable, one being the Mitsurugi engine in some form, and then the other being Malice. So for the next few days, I need to lock in and decide exactly which of the 2 I'm going to play.